will be merging its Chinese e-commerce business and its international e-commerce business. Hi everyone, and this is episode 101 of the Impulso podcast. So last week, or more specifically last Thursday, two very big things happened in the e-commerce scene in China, right? And today, we're going to be talking about the first big thing that happened. Alibaba announced that it will be merging its Chinese e-commerce businesses. So this includes like Taobao, Temu, Xianyu, as well as 1688, which is their B2B e-commerce site, right? Will be merging with their international e-commerce businesses like Lazada, Daraz, AliExpress, as well as Alibaba.com.
You missed Trendyol.
Trendyol, yeah. Trendyol is the one in Turkey.
Performing very well.
Yeah. So Alibaba has decided to merge all these businesses. And Jiang Fan, who is currently the CEO of Alibaba's International Digital Commerce Group, AIDC, will be heading the new unit, which would be called the Alibaba E-Commerce Business Group. So Jiang Fan has been in Alibaba since 2013?
Yeah, so this guy was born in 1985, so fairly young as compared to many of the co-founders of Alibaba. He started a company doing, I think, kind of mobile advertising, and that company was acquired by Alibaba in 2013, I think for 80 million, allegedly, USD. So as a result, he joined Alibaba, and gradually, I think he took over the management of Taobao, Temu, basically the core e-commerce platforms of Alibaba Group. So when he was there, I think he pushed for a number of initiatives. That includes live commerce. I think he was the ardent supporter of live commerce, even though in the early days, I mean, many of the initiatives didn't make ROI sense. So he still pushed for it. I think he was the one who drove the mobile transformation of Taobao. I think nowadays, especially in emerging markets, it's quite natural for us to access all these platforms on mobile. But back then, it was not certain. So he drove that. And I think for a while, people believed that he would eventually succeed to become the CEO of Alibaba Group as a whole. I think so in 2019, 2020, he was managing Taobao, Temu, and both core e-commerce platforms on Alibaba.
He was one of the youngest, like when I searched, they call it partners of Alibaba. He was one of the youngest few. So a lot of people felt that he has a lot of potential. But of course, in 2020, due to personal reasons, he was kind of demoted, right?
Yes, there was an interesting incident happening that year. So a famous influencer was saying that, I think was like making a public statement which might lead people to assume that he is having an affair I think his wife or something was making a public announcement about a potential affair he was allegedly having with the influencer. So that caused a dilemma for Alibaba Group because, I mean, whether this thing can be proven or not, it's probably very hard to prove this. Alibaba had historically been trying to uphold a very high standard for its employees. I mean, I think that stemmed from the early days when most of what it did was B2B sales and there was lots of corruption in it. So as a result, they imposed all these like values which they tried very hard to enforce. Right before that incident, so it was the Mid-Autumn Festival, and you know what happens in Chinese world for the Mid-Autumn Festival.
People give mooncakes.
Yes, and all these big internet firms give their employees mooncakes. And somehow a few programmers in the team wrote a script to get more mooncakes than their peers. And I think the number was like, they got like 125 extra boxes of mooncakes or something, which is quite odd because nobody actually eats the mooncakes.
Yeah, I was like, what were they going to do with all those boxes of mooncakes?
I don't know, but these people were fired.
Oh, okay.
So when that alleged incident involving Jiang Fan came out, and people were saying that, hey, can you apply the same standard to him? So obviously, he was capable, and whatever happened, I mean, it's largely personal, and it's not proven.
Yeah, but he wasn't fired, right? So he was just demoted. And then, of course, earlier this year, they actually brought him back to lead Alibaba International Digital Commerce, AIDC. And of course, while he was leading AIDC, he made a couple of changes, especially to the international platforms, right? So for AliExpress, I think they kind of shifted their focus to more of a full consignment model. And then, of course, Lazada also started focusing more on their customer experience and optimizing the supply chain. But what have you heard about Jiang Fan as a leader himself? So obviously, he's someone that a lot of people, not just in the organization, but outside of the organization, think has the potential to lead Alibaba in the future. What have you heard about his leadership style?
I know a few people who used to work closely with him and actually would eat meetings with him regularly. So a couple of observations. First, he likes to play with his mobile phone. He probably lives on his mobile phone, and People don't see him really using a laptop or a computer. And quite often in meetings, he's seemingly not paying attention. But at key points, he always threw a comment which rendered everybody else speechless, because clearly that he was paying attention, maybe half-heartedly, and he can always get to the core of the problem. So I think when he came to manage AliExpress, I think you mentioned two things happened, right? First is the full consignment model. We know that before Temu came out, AliExpress internally had been debating about this model for like 2 or 3 years. And I think he led the execution. He said, guys, enough discussion. Let's just go.
Let's
right?
do it.
Let's do it. If you look at the last couple of quarters of results of Alibaba Group, international business was a bright spot because AliExpress was growing faster than China. And for the right reasons, right? Because these are the markets which are relatively untapped and you just need to be focused. So he also did something for Lazada. I think we all heard about the layoffs earlier this year. I mean, which I think we blocked quite a bit in January this year. And people were focusing too much on layoffs, not as much on the rationale behind it. Lazada as an organization was complex. So a lot of initiatives were historically enacted, but I think after a few years, nobody remember what these initiatives were for, what these teams were for.
So everything just got very heavy.
So everything became very heavy, and it became hard for executives to exactly figure out where to get the resources, how to move things. So one thing he did with all these initiatives, let's focus on two things. I mean, the user experience as well as the supply side. Not to say that these two things are easy to do, but at least I think he was able to look at the very complex picture and say that, okay, these are the things we should focus on. The rest, not important.
So he seems very sharp and very focused.
He's pretty sharp.
Yeah.
He's pretty
If
sharp.
you guys are interested in the Lazada layoffs, we do have, I think, 2 podcast episodes that we did earlier this year when it was happening. So I will link those down in the show notes below and you guys can check it out if you're
I remember
interested.
all this.
So this is interesting because in 2019, right, Wang Xing, who is actually the founder of Meituan, he actually made a sort of prediction on social media, right? So he wrote, in the coming years, it will be fascinating to watch how the extremely intelligent Colin Huang of Pinduoduo and Jiang Fan of Taobao Tmall compete with each other. It should be quite exciting. If Jiang Fan manages to win this round, he will undoubtedly become the successor to the Alibaba CEO role if he has any interest in taking on that position. And this was in 2019.
So he wrote that before the pandemic.
Yes.
Interesting.
And also before the whole scandal with Jiang Fan happened, right?
Okay.
But I think it's pretty similar to what we are seeing now. Obviously, one of Alibaba's biggest competitors is Pinduoduo in China and of course Temu outside of China, right?
Yeah.
And he's kind of predicted this.
So I think Wang Xing, the founder of Meituan, is known for very, very deep thoughts. It was, I think, 2 years after the IPO of Pinduoduo, and there was a time where I think most of Alibaba was still confident that, okay, I mean, Pinduoduo is ready for cheap goods, and they're not making money, etc., etc., and they're just paying to grow the user numbers. But I think the smart people inside took Pinduoduo very seriously. The question is that how do you move the whole organization to also take Pinduoduo seriously and actually execute against this formidable competitor.
But I think it's interesting that he also pointed out Jiang Fan, right? So obviously now we are kind of seeing how Jiang Fan will lead the e-commerce business unit of Alibaba to compete with Pinduoduo. But I think that the merger is also quite interesting because last year in March, Alibaba announced one of their biggest restructuring, which is essentially splitting their group into 6 business units, right? So we have a report on it if you guys are interested. It's called Transforming Alibaba. It will be linked in the show notes below. But essentially, we talk about why Alibaba has decided to split its business units into the Cloud Intelligence Group, Taobao Tmall Commerce Group, Global Digital Commerce Group, which of course includes Lazada, AliExpress, Cainiao Smart Logistic Network, Local Services Group, and of course lastly, Digital Media and Entertainment Group. But of course, after this announcement, they have made multiple announcements after that, saying that they were going to reverse some of these. They are going to reverse the splits and start merging them back together.
So Phyllis, if you could pull out that page in our Transforming Alibaba report, which we published, I think, earlier this year, that was already 3 quarters after the transformation kick-started. They were already making some reversals to the split, right? I mean, initially, we said that, okay, we are going to split the group into 6 and make each business accountable. I think that made logical sense in a way that, because they're
a very heavy organization.
They had 30 plus different businesses, and Pinduoduo had 3.
And I guess at some point they felt that it got too heavy and it was kind of hard for them to be very lean and make quick decisions, right? Especially when your competitor is so fast.
It's hard for them to move fast, and it's also hard for them to make everybody accountable because they probably knew that there are many businesses which, if you put them standalone, they'll probably not be able to survive. And it's the other businesses which are subsidizing these businesses. But it's very hard for leaders to also make decisions on all these businesses, right? So for instance, prior to the transformation, I think the core leaders at Alibaba actually worked very hard to listen to reports of all these businesses and try to make decisions. But I mean, just how much attention can you have for all these different businesses in different areas? So that was challenging.
So that was the initial idea. But of course, now they are kind of reversing, right? So in Alibaba Group's CEO Eddie Wu's internal note, he mentioned that all business unit heads of finance will now report directly to Group CEO. So I think this further confirms that they are kind of reversing their merging strategy. I think the question here is why, right? So initially they wanted to split because things were getting heavy. So why are they now reversing this and starting to merge the different units together instead?
I do think, again, put that page about the reversal. So in early this year, they already made a few changes to the initial strategy. We're dealing with something that is very uncertain, right? You start implementing restructuring, and they are in a sector which is very fast moving. So it's not something that you can plan for 5 years. More traditional industries, things don't move fast, and you can have more sort of long-term planning, 5-year, 10-year, and even like 2 decades. But in e-commerce, things will move very fast, and you need to make changes. One of Alibaba's core values is that the only thing that doesn't change is change, right? Change is the only constant. So the thing is that when you try to move things, and quite often you hit obstacle, and you will need to make a quick decision saying, hey, do I execute over this obstacle, or do I change course and pivot, moving to something else? So I do think that they made a few of that decisions. Some of them, I think, more of them made sense, right? So you try to separate Cainiao and you try to IPO Cainiao, the logistic arm, and the market was not receptive. So what do we do? Right.
You just, okay. But also because obviously Cainiao handles logistics, right? So it's very closely integrated with the e-commerce side of the business. So sometimes to merge them, I think it's also difficult to just have like a clean split, especially when all the business units all work so closely together.
Yeah, it is very hard because, if you move some of the Cainiao functions away from the group still need logistics. And cloud is the same thing, right? I think last year, close to Double 11, there was an incident of a cloud outage for 2 hours. And then you start to think that, okay, do I really want the cloud to be a separate unit? Or do I want to have control over that cloud because the whole thing depends on it?
If you guys are interested, we did have a couple of podcast episodes as well where we talked about Alibaba's restructuring as well as their reversal of the restructuring. So I'll link those down in the show notes. You guys can check it out. And I do think that from Alibaba's standpoint, at least, it makes sense for them to merge their international and domestic e-commerce, especially considering their main competitor, Pinduoduo, has one team leading both.
Yes, we are in Singapore, right?
Yeah.
And do you buy things from Taobao, or do you buy things from Lazada, or do you buy things from Shopee? Okay,
yeah.
Good.
Sorry, I don't even have. There are other competitors, a much smaller competitor now.
So this past Double 11, we realized that there are actually a lot more people actually buying on Taobao, and primarily because I think the infrastructure is there for cross-border. And the second is that I think Taobao also did quite a number of dedicated promotions for this market. So should Taobao and Lazada be competing against each other, or should there be some synergy? And in a large organization, who should make that synergy? I think there are lots of resources in Alibaba which are duplicate, and there are lots of initiatives which are targeting the same sort of audience or the same merchant base. I think having some kind of complete oversight would make it easier, not easier, but would make it more sensible for them to dedicate resources. Not to say that it's easy, because it's still a large organization.
Yes. But I think it'll be interesting to see how Jiang Fan manages it. And of course, like what Wang Xing predicted, right? If he manages to do it well, it's probably his stepping stone to being the next CEO of Alibaba.
Yeah, he's 10 years younger than Eddie. And so obviously he has a much longer runway.
And of course, we also mentioned Pinduoduo, right? So in the next episode of the Impulso podcast, we're going to be talking about the second big thing that happened last Thursday in the Chinese e-commerce scene, which of course is Pinduoduo's Q3 earnings, where they announced that they actually missed revenue consensus. So we'll be
It seems
diving.
that they didn't care about consistency at all.
It seems like they wanted to miss you on purpose, but we will discuss more on that in the next episode. So if you guys are interested, do like and subscribe and stay tuned for the next episode of the Impulso podcast.
See you.
Bye bye.